Hello, everyone, and welcome to CBank Network. I am Lauren, and I will be your host and moderator for today's webinar. Today, we are excited to present Managing Fraud and Compliance Together with a Unified Approach. Our presenter for today will be Ravi Sandepudi, co-founder and CEO of Effectiv.
Okay, thanks a lot, Lauren. And thank you so much, CBank, for giving us this opportunity to talk a little bit about a topic that we as an organization are very, very passionate about. Like Lauren mentioned, today we'll be speaking about how to manage fraud and compliance risk holistically within your financial institution or organization. Right? This is a topic that we've been working on for a very long time as a team. Just as a background, as Lauren mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders of a tech company called Effectiv. We are a fraud and risk management platform for financial institutions. Prior to this, I was part of PayPal, and that happened because of an acquisition of another tech company I was part of called Simility, where we were building, again, fraud detection software for larger enterprise banks. We serve banks like US Bank, Discover, Synchrony, and so on, while at Simility. Prior to that, I was at Google, again, in the fraud detection space. Had an opportunity to, I don't know, fortunately or unfortunately, looked at very, very complex and very egregious fraud attacks within our ecosystem. Worked on Google Pay, for example, and saw very interesting scenarios of money laundering that was happening, and we try to build systems to detect and prevent those. So as a team, like I mentioned, we are very passionate about the space. We've built Effectiv with the sole purpose of serving smaller and mid-sized financial institutions. And we take this topic to heart, that managing fraud and compliance holistically through one unified platform makes a drastic difference in protecting your customers and members. Right? I'll cover a lot of this in detail in subsequent slides. So what we'll cover today? The first is from our experience in the past. Like I mentioned, we'll try to speak how larger financial institutions have deployed enterprise-grade fraud and risk systems and the benefits that they have achieved. Second, how can we bring that knowledge and that comprehensive expertise that larger financial institutions have built and make it accessible and usable for smaller and mid-sized FIs so that they have the same power and capabilities to manage fraud. There are some very interesting industry trends that are happening where fraudsters are shifting focus from larger financial institutions to smaller ones because everyone is on a digitization wave, right? And fraudsters are seeing this opportunity and going behind now smaller organizations. And then finally, we'll cover some specific use cases around fraud, risk, and compliance, and how you can solve these issues by taking a unified platform approach. Like I mentioned in the earlier slide, on the enterprise fraud and risk systems, there are two things, right? The first is the benefits of implementing an enterprise level solution for larger financial institutions. Multiple, right? So you, for example, there are softwares like the SAS where you can build very complicated statistical platforms. But you need the resources both monetarily and team-wise to configure these systems, right? You need whole teams of hundreds of risk analysts and data scientists to identify patterns and configure these complex systems, but they work at that level. But at the same time, that kind of complexity does not translate to smaller financial institutions, right? Like we don't have the resources, both monetarily and by team, to do this. But newer technologies are now available, which will allow even smaller financial institutions to tackle fraud and compliance at this holistic level. And I'll cover some of these things in subsequent slides. So to begin with, there's a first polling question. I think Lauren, you'll drop this in, but just we wanted to get a quick sense of how what kind of fraud and compliance risk challenges you're currently facing. This is something that we've been observing in the industry so far, so would love to get your feedback on this.
All right, and again, if you are here for CPE credits, then make sure you're participating in the polls. If you're not here for CPE credits, we'd still love to hear from you. And I'll go ahead and leave this open for another 30 seconds or so, just so we make sure everyone who does need to vote has a chance.
What kind of challenges you're currently facing, right? Is it that you have very disparate systems that are trying to manage fraud across various financial products that you provide? Is it the resources? Is your fraud and financial crime team getting overwhelmed with requests and reviews that they have to do? Are you facing issues onboarding new accounts and loan applications? Is that slowing down? Is the regulatory environment changing too rapidly for your team to keep abreast about? And then finally, like I mentioned, more and more customers and members are expecting a very smooth digital experience, especially at the time of onboarding or interacting with your financial institution. And for financial institutions to maintain the same level of user experience that fintechs are providing, we need to be very fast, right? So is that becoming a problem?
All right, let's go ahead and close out this poll. We can take a look at the results. All right, so it looks like 29% chose a separate approach solution for each type of risk. 24% are seeing not enough resources to fight financial crime effectively. 13% are having difficulty with onboarding new accounts and loan applications. 24% rapidly changing regulatory environment, and only 9% maintaining a smooth digital experience for account holders.
That's great to hear. Awesome, thanks, Lauren. So that's very interesting to hear. Obviously, the first point that stood out is the topic of this conversation. So that's great. So we'll try to cover some areas on how we can solve this, right? Like how can we mitigate this issue of having disparate systems or teams looking at different kinds of sections within the financial institutions, and how can we unify it and build a much more robust risk strategies across the organization. So yeah, like we discussed, again, from our observations, and which also is reflecting in the poll, is that the siloed approach of taking approach between the fraud and compliance risk management is always a challenge for financial institutions. The second is we see limited resources, like we spoke about, and how can we still address the changing regulatory environment, keeping abreast with those changes, tackling new kinds of fraud attacks that are coming up in the industry. All of this by using technology and combining it with the expertise of a small team. Right? And third, like I mentioned, how do we choose and leverage the right risk management platform for both onboarding and continuous monitoring of our customers and members? So let's take this scenario, right? So there's someone who applies for a checking account. They come to a branch, open up a checking account at 3 p.m., go to an ATM and do a check deposit at 4 p.m. And then by 5, they are performing certain Zelle transactions that is almost as with the same monetary value as the check deposit, right? Now, if you look at each of these events independently, there's nothing wrong or suspicious about it, right? Someone has come to the branch and opened up the account, someone has deposited a check, someone is doing a Zelle transaction. But when you look at it holistically and look at all these 3 events with the context of each other, you see that there is something off, right? Like, why is someone opening up an account, depositing a check, and moving money out of the account in such a high frequency, right? So this is possible only when you're able to look at the member or the customer life cycle in a holistic approach. And for that, you need, as a financial organization, we need to have structurally both the teams set up to look at all of these events in context of each other and together. And 2, we need the technology and the platform to be able to monitor across the life cycle of the member, right? So if you have a system that is looking at all of these 3 events together, then we'll be able to very easily identify that this is an unexpected behavior of a normal customer or a normal member. So when you look at the broader compliance and fraud monitoring events across the member life cycle, so you start off with account creation, right, which was the first event that has happened, which involves basically verifying user identity, assessment to set like privileges and prevent malicious users from signing up. So a lot of the BSA AML checks happen at this time. You're also verifying the account for whether they're doing first party, third party fraud or synthetic ID fraud, all the account opening verifications. The second comes after the account is opened, monitoring the account for general behavior, right? Logins, PIN changes, password changes, profile changes, or any other kind of behavior that's happening once the account is opened. And third is when the actual money is being moved, right? So at this time, you're doing transaction monitoring, both at real time, right? So when someone swipes a card, goes to an ATM and withdraws, ACH, RTP, Zelle, and so on. And the second kind of transaction monitoring is when you do retroactively, right? So transactions have already happened. Now you're going back and looking at the last 90 days worth of transaction data to see if there are any suspicious patterns. And that's where, again, compliance comes into play along with fraud, where you try to do these money laundering detections, right? So, so what I wanted to portray is you need to look at fraud and compliance first as something that needs to be done together, because both go hand in glove. The only thing is, when we say compliance, these are regulated area, whereas fraud is quote unquote an unregulated area, right? But both have serious implications on the financial institutions. So missing out regulations leads to fines, missing out fraud leads to fraud losses. So in both ways, the financial institution is impacted and the customers and the members are impacted. So just reiterating what was covered in the last slide, we need to build a comprehensive defense and monitoring system across the life cycle of the member, right? So starting out from account origination, and these could be, again, like consumer or commercial accounts. And by accounts, these could be checking accounts, deposit accounts, loan applications, card applications, and even BNPL, if your organization is looking into that as well. So all kinds of verifications at the time of account origination, followed by monitoring, and followed by money movement. And behind the scenes, the right technology can help you start creating these networks and patterns of behavior across the life cycle of the user, right? Coming back to the example that I've given, there are uh, technologies that can help you determine whether certain sequence of events is anomalous or not, right? So you actually don't even need to say that account being opened, um, and check being deposited and money being moved within 1 hour is suspicious, right? There are systems that learn this by themselves by looking at the general behavior of the overall population and saying that, and looking at this particular sequence of events and figuring out that this sequence is actually anomalous, right? So systems have become so powerful right now when you have this unified uh, data set behind the scenes that as a BSA officer or as a fraud analyst, you don't even need to write these identify these criteria and write and maintain these handwritten rules. And the more data that you feed into these systems, the better they get at uh, identifying these sequences of events and figuring out if they're anomalies or not, right? And there's also a lot of power in sequencing both financial and non-financial events, right? Like, let's say you pass in logins and profile changes also into these into your data set. Now you're able to create this holistic behavioral patterns across your customer base, and again, your fraud detection and compliance becomes very, very powerful, both from fraud detection and from a money laundering kind of an aspect as well. On that note, coming over to the next polling questions, we just wanted to understand in your current setup, how satisfied are you with your current fraud and compliance monitoring tools? Mainly, are they helping you become more efficient? Are they actually hindering your day-to-day activities? Broadly, we wanted to get a sense of how satisfied you are with the setup that you have at the moment.
All right, last call for this poll before I close it out. And we can go ahead and take a look at the results. So 60% are satisfied. We have 13% very satisfied, and then 24% dissatisfied, and only 3% very dissatisfied.
Got it. That's great to hear. So there is, it's good to hear that there is always some scope for improvement. I think, like most of you have observed, the tools that we have in place at this time have gotten fairly uh, powerful, right? That we have at our disposal. Now, what we need to do is, rather than being very reactive to these activities in terms of either fraud or compliance monitoring, to becoming very proactive, right? As a person who's been on the other side of the industry, on the fintech side, with Google Pay and PayPal, we have seen the dearth of the fraudsters, right? So we have been on the target of very powerful uh, fraudsters and fraud organizations, that we had to build a lot of very sophisticated proactive tools internally to protect our users. And I think that since that focus is shifting towards smaller financial institutions, I think we need to be very prepared on our side as well. So on that note, I wanted to cover a little bit about all the new age risk tools that are available in the market that can help you become a little bit more proactive in preventing fraud and compliance issues within your organizations. And broadly speaking, from a risk management perspective, there are fundamentally three tool sets that you need, right? Which will help you drastically improve the efficiency of your risk and BSA programs within your organization. In fact, any kind of risk, including cyber risk and credit risk, all of these need fundamentally the same platform to automate and increase efficiency. The first is what we call as workflow management. And workflow management is nothing but a sequence of um, basically a strategy execution engine, right? So, for example, for someone evaluating an account opening event, when someone comes to a branch and trying to open an account, there are some sequence of steps that you take, right? So first, you look up sanction lists. Second, you're trying to evaluate if the address and the phone number matches. Third, you want to do some ID verification. Fourth, you want to do some additional fraud checks or credit checks. And then finally, open the account, right? So the workflow management systems help you automate these sequence of steps by providing a very visual representation of these sequence of verifications that you do, so that you don't need to actually program or code to automate these systems. So that is what we call as workflow management, and you can create as simple or as complex workflows behind the scenes using these systems, right? So that's one fundamental piece. The second piece is if that workflow or the strategy that you've designed is unable to automatically decide whether to approve or decline an application, you need to manually investigate it, right? So there comes in your case and alert management systems. Again, these case management systems, you can be as simple or as powerful as they can be, right? So again, in the case management system, you want to help the investigators and the reviewers to make them more efficient, right? So what kind of information can you show to the investigator to help them take a faster and a more accurate decision? And once they take those decisions, how can you feed that data back into your workflow management so that it improves and the automation gets better, right? And the third is on reporting and dashboarding, right? So for any kind of risk management program, be it compliance, be it fraud, be it credit, or even cyber risk, you need to understand the various metrics and performance of how this program is running. And you need to have a robust reporting and dashboarding system, right? Both for internally for improving the programs that you have, and two, for compliance and regulations, right? So in order to share your reports with FinCEN or to improve your own internal functioning of the organization. What I'm showing you is this a very typical like a comprehensive risk management platforms that you can get in the industry. And this is how they usually operate, right? So on the left-hand side, you have what we call as an API, which basically an interface through which the systems can accept data. And this could be a transaction, this could be an account application, and so on. That data is then augmented using all the industry level data services that are available, that are really good in certain specific areas, right? So there are services like Threat Metrics, which is a LexisNexis service that gives you information about the device that was used to make the application or the transaction. There's a service called Emailage that gives you information about the email, right? How new or how old is the email? How reputed is that email domain? Prove does something similar for phone numbers, and so on and so forth, right? So you not only take the data that you're receiving from your customer or the member, but you're also augmenting that data from all the external data services that you have available to you. So you augment that data, take that data, and then pass it through the workflow management system to finally try and evaluate and simulate what a BSA officer would do. Right? So you're trying to processify those steps and improve efficiency and automation. And once all the computations and the automations run, then a decision is sent back to your banking systems, and all of the integration takes a complete 360-degree loop. Right? And across within these this whole loop, you can, like I mentioned, you can keep improving the automation, improving the efficiency of the investigators by plugging in machine learning systems that are again available in the market, and they help you improve both manual reviews as well as automated reviews. So coming back to what can be done from using systems like these, right? Starting off again from onboarding, where we have to do both compliance and fraud related evaluations. So I'll start off with what these evaluations are, right? And if you are already looking at these kind of criteria within your financial organization, that is great. If not, I think this is something that you have, it is great for you to be aware of, because these are something that are being faced by every other larger financial institutions and fintech companies currently operating in the market, right? So on the onboarding side, we start off with three kinds of fraud that you have to be very careful about. So first party fraud is a very tricky and interesting problem to solve, which basically means that the person who's applying for a loan or for a deposit account is actually the person that they're claiming to be, but they have an intention to defraud the financial institution at some point in time, right? So they are using their own credentials to apply, but they, for example, they have no intention to pay back the loan, or they intend to max out the credit card and disappear, right? So this is called first party fraud. It is very tricky to identify, but there are multiple solutions in the market, especially when you're doing this holistic approach of looking at what has happened at account opening versus transactions versus disbursement of loan. These kind of behaviors are easier to determine. The second is third party fraud. So third party fraud is basically someone using someone else's credentials to apply for the loan, right? And so I use Lauren's SSN number and name to apply for a loan on her behalf, take the loan and disappear. This is something that's a little bit easier to identify, but third-party fraud is something that is growing exponentially, right? Because everything has moved digital. The ease of stealing credentials through digital channels is always higher, right? So we have to be, again, very, very careful. And this is one of the biggest kinds of fraud financial institutions face, especially the larger ones. The third, which is new but growing, is synthetic ID fraud. So this is someone who completely fabricates a new identity, either by mixing and matching details from different people or minting completely new data, right? And so there's no person of this name or SSN. They fabricate it, create something called a mule account so that they have some history and then apply for a loan, right? So these are the three kinds of frauds that are not truly regulated, but hit financial institutions very badly. And as organizations, we have to be very careful that we are addressing all three of them, right? Then coming on to compliance, these are something that every organization has to comply with. So obviously KYC and KYB, and then sanction list screening. So these are the two bare minimum regulatory activities that we have to do, right? So these 5 things are something that every financial institution need to look at or need to have some way of addressing while onboarding new members or customers into the financial institution. Right? So that's the first piece. The second comes money movement, and this is once the account has been opened, they're transacting, right? The money is being moved either through ACH, wire, Zelle, RTP, right? The P2P transactions or the traditional wire transactions, or deposits, right? Money coming into the account as well. All of these things need to be verified. So you need to have real-time monitoring systems to evaluate transactions, right? So do you allow that transaction? Do you decline the transaction, or do you do a two-factor auth, right? So do you want to additionally verify before you allow that transactions? Many of them, especially the new age ones in P2P, like Zelle, RTP, and FedNow, which everyone expects to use, have only 5 seconds to adjudicate, right? And it's a one-way transaction. Unlike ACH, there's no way to pull back the money. So as a bank or a credit union, you need to be very, very careful in adjudicating these, and you have very little time to do so, right? So again, having this holistic approach of knowing what has happened at account opening time, using that risk that you evaluated to adjudicate transactions gives you a lot of power and confidence in either letting or declining such transactions, right? Coming on to the compliance side of money movement, obviously money laundering and transaction monitoring becomes very important. So this is retroactive study, right? So looking at last 30, 90 days worth of transactions and trying to see if there are any suspicious patterns of money movement that denote potential money laundering, right? So is money moving across your accounts or outside to other financial institutions and coming back in a way that is atypical? These are very complex to manually monitor and evaluate. Here again, you need to have certain technologies in place that is able to crunch millions of data points to identify these suspicious patterns, right? So that's on the money movement side. And then finally, coming to continuous monitoring of the account, right? So looking at, like we spoke about before, non-financial events like logins, PIN changes, statement downloads, password changes, adding new beneficiaries, and things of that sort. So continuously looking at those kinds of events to identify whether the digital banking credentials have been stolen. Is it the same user using that account, right? To perform these actions, looking at things like even mouse movements and keystroke analysis to identify the general behavior of the users within your digital banking account or on the mobile app, right? On the compliance side, again, you need to continuously do due diligence. I think there are regulations coming in place where you are now expected to do continuous KYC, right? So not just at the time of account opening, but continuously monitoring the accounts to ensure that they are not hitting any sanction lists that are being updated. If there are any profile changes, again, rescanning for sanction lists and so on. Then finally, obviously, if you're identifying any suspicious behavior, filing SARs, CTRs, 314As. So all of those regulatory activities need to be done as part of your account monitoring workflow. And I hope I didn't like overwhelm you, but there's lots of these activities that happen from a fraud and compliance perspective, right? So many just think of when someone says BSA or fraud, all they think of is like sanctionless screening, and then you're good to go, right? But there's so many other things that you need to keep doing. Yeah, right at the account opening time to continuously throughout the life cycle of the member or the customer of the financial institution, right? And that's why having this unified platform, unified teams that are doing this together and having a common strategy across all the checkpoints within your bank becomes so much more important as you grow as a financial institution and as we become more and more digital. Right? So that brings us to the last polling question. Just wanted to get an overall sense of how you feel these programs are being run, how these programs are being run at your organization at this time. Is it the same teams? Are you looking at merging fraud and BSA teams together? Or do you plan to keep them separate? Or do you not at this moment proactively monitor fraud, right? So are you just focused on BSA activities at this time?
All right. So we have 49% same team, 8% are in the process of merging teams, 37% separate teams and tools, and only 6% only have a compliance program.
God, that's wonderful to hear. Actually, that's great to hear that very few don't have like a actively fraud monitoring program. But it's also very interesting to see that we're equally split between having same teams versus having separate teams to do like fraud and compliance monitoring. So I wonder where the trend is going. We suspect it's trending more towards the first point, where having a common team and that is managing both the programs. I think eventually that's the direction most mid to small financial institutions will be going. Right. Now, just summarizing all the things that we have discussed so far. So the first, obviously, is to have is what we are proposing is to have a very holistic approach to fraud and risk management, right? Like look at it as an organization-wide problem and try to address it in a similar way, right? Like looking at the entire life cycle of a member or a customer to adjudicate each and every event that the customer is performing. Right? Second is, again, if you take this holistic approach, augmenting the data that you already have to make these adjudications using third-party data management partners, like we mentioned, like LexisNexis and so on, becomes so much more easier and very powerful, right? So the email data that you get at the account opening time can be used at a later point when they apply for another financial product in your company, in your organization, right? So the device biometrics that you obtain at account opening time can be used when you're adjudicating a Zelle transaction, right? So becomes very, very powerful in that direction as well. Second is once you take this holistic approach and you're consolidating data across the life cycle of the member or the customer, you can use very innovative machine learning capabilities to identify suspicious sequence and patterns of events, right? Like I mentioned, fraud is not a point in time activity, right? So it happens across multiple points in time, and finding these suspicious sequence of events, machine learning and AI are very, very powerful in those, right? So much more powerful than actually humans can be, right? And I think we can utilize these technologies that are available for us in a very, very powerful way. Third is you can create very customizable workflow strategies, right? Like some of these patterns that we had discussed about account opening, check deposit, Zells, and things of that sort can be done using platforms that are available in the market. And you no longer need to write code to automate these sequence of checks that you need to do. You now have technologies available where you can literally drag and drop and very visually create these workflows and manage these workflows all on your own. Right? And then having a powerful case management system becomes very important. I think there's a misconception in the market that fraud and risk management can be automated if you have AI and machine learning, but that's definitely not the case, right? There's always a very strong need for human intervention and experts to look at gray area and suspicious cases, and that will never go away, right? So as long as fraudsters trying to attack us, we need experts looking into that, right? Because AI and machine learning is only as good as what we have seen and learned in the past, right? But we need to keep improving that system to become more efficient. So we need to still have a powerful case management and a review capability where experts are given all the data that's needed to take the final decision, but they're also made more efficient, right? So they reviewers and investigators shouldn't be looking at the same kind of cases that they have seen in the past. They need to be looking at more and more complex cases. Then finally, real-time monitoring and decisioning, right? In the whole digital world, this is a no-brainer. So we need to have systems that is able to adjudicate in real time, both from transactions to logins to PIN changes, whatever, right? Any kind of digital interaction needs a real-time decisioning. So these are the various advantages we feel of trying to think about having this unified approach to risk management, both from a technology and from a team and structure point of view. So that brings to the end of the topic that we wanted to discuss. Just as we end, I wanted to give a quick overview about what we do at Effectiv. Like we mentioned in the past, we are a fraud and risk management technology company, hyper-focused on mid-sized financial institutions, right? And we want to help small and mid-sized financial institutions really improve their risk management systems. And we fully believe in taking this unified approach of solving this and using technology to get there, right? And like I mentioned, we've worked in very large financial institutions and fintech companies in the past, and we've been having fairly good success so far in helping financial institutions really optimize their risk management strategies, but more importantly, save a lot of costs and help them like confidently adopt digital platforms and serve their members and customers better. Cool. So I'll pause here, Lauren. If there are any questions, would love to answer that as well.
All right. So yes, thank you so much. That was a great presentation. If you do have any questions you'd like to ask, you can go ahead and pop them in the questions box, and we'd love to answer them for you. In the meantime, while we're waiting, we do have two final polling questions we can get through. All right. Would you like to be contacted by Effectiv? Yes or no? So if you would like to, you can just answer yes, and we'll go ahead and pass your information along so that Effectiv can reach out to you. If not, no worries. And again, we will leave this poll open for a full minute just to make sure everyone who would like to vote or needs to vote for CPE credits can go ahead and get their answers in. So again, thank you so much, Ravi, for that wonderful presentation. Just as a quick reminder, You will see a CPE survey pop up shortly, and we thank you in advance for filling this out. Thank you all for attending. Thank you, Ravi, for speaking. Thank you, Effectiv. Um, and this concludes today's webinar. I hope everybody has a great rest of your day.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
thanks, Seabank. Thank you, Lauren. And yeah, we are, like we mentioned, we are fraud and risk nerds. So if you ever want to chat with us, we're always available, even outside of the Effectiv thing, right? So if you just want to chat about risk and fraud, we are always very open. Thank you so much again.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.